I'll call the September 26th meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. Noting nobody from the public in the audience, we'll move past the first item on the agenda of public participation, and we'll then move to what we'll call Steve Barrett's choice as to where we go from here.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Our HR director, as you've noted, was out late last night with the Town Manager Search Committee, so...
For the record, John will back me up on this. We kept Mary Ann out till 10:15, and she lives in Westford, thank God, but, you know.
So we'll turn the mic off right now, Mary Ann. But, so, Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if Mary Ann dove right into some of the basics of collective bargaining for the committee?
It's fine with me. That way she can leave when she's done.
There you go. That's all hooked up. Okay. That one's, you know, the top one is, if you want to point something.
All right, great. Okay. So good evening. Thank you very much. Myself and usually the town manager and any department head who is involved in the collective bargaining. For example, the chief of police would be involved with patrol or superiors. The fire chief would be involved in fire negotiations, for example. We have 5 unions, and we have patrol and superiors, that's police. We have the Teamsters, and the Teamsters represent our dispatchers. We have the International Association of Firefighters, who represent the firefighters. And then our 5th is AFSCME, which is the, I always want to say association. I believe it's the Association of Federal, State, County, and Municipal Employees. So AFSCME is a very large organization. It's like NAGE, which is the National Association of Government Employees. AFSCME represents our highway employees, our cemetery employees, and our municipal properties employees. So the majority of our employees are unionized. The ones that are not are management, supervisory, clerical, those types of other positions. But about 80% is unionized. That's just a quick summary. So in general, what is collective bargaining? And so I'm not going to literally read the slides for you, but what it is, it's negotiation between the employer and representatives of the unions. And so the representatives of those unions are voted by the unions, and they sit at the table and they negotiate with management. And it can include wages, salary, hours of work, the environmental needs. Pretty much anything is on the table for negotiation. The union will put its package on the table, and management will put its package on the table. Union usually puts a salary package, anything that is monetary related, but they also will submit other requests, ideas that may not have a monetary value, but something that is important to them, to their union. Whether it's some type of working condition or anything else. So things to remember, in most cases, most sides, we must approve and sign the agreement before it can become a binding contract. We also must promote and follow all agreed upon collective bargaining rules and procedures. So you hear that and you think, well, of course you must approve and agree upon whatever is negotiated. But what happens is that once you sign, and this happens enough where there's ambiguity. This actually happened today where we had to interpret a sentence in one of the police contracts. The union had one interpretation, we had another, we discussed it. You leave that discussion and both sides have to agree upon to administer whatever that interpretation is. whether that was your first intention or it wasn't, you have to promote and agree upon and follow that collective bargaining agreement language. If not, the union can put an unfair labor practice on you. And we've been very fortunate. I should add that we get along with the unions. They're great. It's a very good working relationship that we have with all 5 unions. And that's something that actually isn't the norm. I worked for the state for 20 years. I did collective bargaining with the state. I've negotiated with almost every union, I think every union in the state. And sometimes it can get contentious, and you can bargain until you come to impasse, and then you end up in arbitration. So we are very fortunate, and we work hard to keep that relationship going. So what happens first is that we set the ground rules. Ground rules could be that you have to put all your negotiation ideas, suggestions on the table within your first 3 meetings. That's an example. Another example is that you will only negotiate for 2 hours at a time or 24 hours at a time. And that actually does exist, 24 hours. We have not done it here in Acton. But it is common. Both sides should collect and analyze information. It's comparable communities. We do that. Whether we use the ALG communities or the communities that the union and town agree upon of what is comparable. Common towns that we've used are Concord, Westford, even towns that are not contiguous to Acton, like Hingham. Towns that are similar setup, municipal setup as Acton. We make our opening statements, outline possible solutions, and negotiate from there. So our negotiation sessions, historically, both sides have agreed to introduce changes only during the first 3 sessions. I mentioned that on the earliest slide. And reason why you do that, you don't want to be so far down the road in negotiating and you've given something to the other side and then something comes flying back at you in the 5th session. So you have to show all your cards. You can negotiate from there and you can change it up, which you often do, but you can't introduce something totally new. We usually negotiate for 2 hours. And we also caucus during those hours to decide what we're going to give and take. Caucus means that management goes to one room, the unions go to another room. Whoever requests the caucus, you caucus for as long as you need to, but you try to respect the other side, that they're sitting in the other room waiting and waiting and waiting. So you try to give them a timeline of, well, we need about a half hour. We only need about 5 minutes. So a lot of it has to do with just simple respect. And it's amazing, but it really works. So basics of negotiating for common ground. You have to know what your plan is going in, just like anything in business. You have to know your goals. You have to know what you want to have walking out generally. It's a give and take. And I've never been on a negotiation team where management has gotten everything they wanted, and I'm sure the union hasn't either. Make sure that you're dealing with the right people. Again, common sense, simple, but if you don't have the person that can shake on that deal, you can bargain all you want, you just have the wrong people in the room. Make sure you have your subject matter experts. That's why if we need the fire chief or the police chief or the supervisor of the Teamsters, our employee. And it makes a difference. The DPW director, the highway director, for AFSCME, municipal properties director. Don't let the pressure make a deal push you into decision. Sometimes you can get caught up in that, like just give it to him, just give it to him, just give it to him. And the patience really plays a big part. You have to wait, see what cards are on the table, hold. And also be specific when asking questions, when you're proposing an idea. This matters a lot because, again, once you sign and then you're living with this collective bargaining agreement that's like 52 pages, and you say to yourself, oh, we didn't spend too much time on this. What do you think this means? It's too late. You have to then, again, similar to what happened with us today, you go back and you're trying to refigure something out. And so you had to be very specific when, okay, what is a day? Is a day 8 hours? Is it 10 hours? Is it 12 hours? It means different things from different unions. If you ask fire, a day is a shift. A shift could be 10 hours, it could be 12 hours. A day to them is 24 hours. A day to me is 8 hours. So on and so on. Simple, but you have to make sure you are very specific. If someone objects to your strategy, ask them why. Ask for an explanation. Maybe there was something that they did that you don't fully understand. Constantly keep the communication lines open. Take all economic conditions into consideration. How shift differential may affect work schedules. What that means is that your patrol officers, there's a shift differential. It's a 24/7 hour job. And so if you negotiate shift differential 75 cents per additional per hour that they're going to get if they work the 11 to 7, well then how does that affect the Fair Labor Standards Act that Steve often gets involved in, because we call it the bonus round, and that has to, and because of the Fair Labor Standard Act, FLSA, you have to recalculate how much more hourly rate that patrol officer will receive, because the Fair Labor Standards Act requires you not only to pay overtime on the hourly rate, but also other incentives such as education. So you have to, it's like one affects the other. On non-economic conditions, for example, grievance process. So today we had a discussion on a grievance, and this particular union management has to respond in 5 days. Maybe 5 days isn't long enough, you negotiate 14 days instead. So the end result, once an agreement is made, it's put into writing. It's called a memorandum of agreement, an MOA. It's presented to the full union membership by their representatives to be ratified. So what they have to do, if, let's say, Bill and Susan are the union representatives for the Teamsters, and they're at the table, and they negotiated, and we shook hands on it, they now have to go back to their full union. And the full union, they have to present that, and they have to convince and market that plan to their whole membership. That whole membership has to vote on it, and it has to be ratified. It has to be voted on, it has to be approved by the full membership in order for it to be signed. And sometimes what happens, if you have someone at the table who doesn't understand enough and they can't go back and explain it to their memberships, it gets jumbled up, it comes back to us. That's a really key thing, that the people understand it and they can explain it to their members. And once it's ratified, I feel like I can't stand anymore. Once it's ratified, the MOA is brought to us, and then we sign it, and then it's actually brought to all of you, the residents of Acton. It's brought to town meeting to be voted on. So you get to vote on it, and we present it to you. And if it's approved, then it's implemented and is integrated into the full collective bargaining agreement. So this is just a portion. Say, for example, we modified 3 articles of the full collective bargaining agreement. That's called the MOA, and then it's integrated completely in. So what happens if you come to an impasse? What if you can't agree upon anything or something, and you negotiate for months, years? When I came here, there was a negotiation that was going on for 3 years, and we were at impasse. And I think that after a year, so it was a total of 4 years, and we ended up at arbitration. And you really don't want to be there. It's the Joint Labor Management Committee, Joint Labor and Management, and you lose a lot of control. Both sides do. because the arbitrator will hear both sides, and they will decide for you, because you obviously couldn't decide amongst yourselves. So you might end up with higher wages, and the union might end up without that education incentive, whatever it is. And you have to live with it, and you have to promote it. And so when you go to town meeting, even if you totally disagreed with it, it's your requirement to promote it and stand by it, which we do. So here it says the panels explore the claims. The panels meaning the arbitration board. They look at all information from both sides to attempt to mediate the solution. They do try to work with us. So possible end results, they may agree with the union, they could agree with the town, but most often it's a hybrid. And it's important to note that the panel may reward a more costly package than the employer's proposal, which I just mentioned. And it's a binding arbitration, which means that it's yours, you own it. And the art of negotiation is a give and take. Any questions?
Thank you, Mary Ann. Questions?
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Hi, on the binding arbitration, is that then subject to the town meeting vote still, or is that the final word?
It is subject upon town meeting vote. And both sides are required to promote that contract, that agreement. No matter how much you agree with it, no matter how much you disagree with it. You're welcome.
John?
Yeah, Mary Ann, when both sides are bound to collect data from comparable communities, Concord and Westford, is that to get a sense of what those other towns are paying their employees?
Yes, it's part of it, what they're paying. It's a total compensation package. A big part of it too is what are you paying for health insurance? What is your split? Is it 50-50%? Is it 75-25 split? Do you pay out firearms, education incentive? Do you pay a shift differential? Do you pay for uniforms, firearms? Acton tends to have the least number of stipends added to their base salary. We're middle of the road. We're in the pack for health insurance with a 75-25 split and the premiums that we pay. But we tend to be on the lower side with the stipends that we pay out.
So collective bargaining, that's a result of a state law, isn't it? That
Yes, Chapter 151.
okay, and that imposes it on all cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth.
That have unions,
Okay,
yes.
that have unions. Okay, and the arbitration, is that just one individual arbitrator, or is it a panel?
It can be a panel. I've seen where it's been one person and three people.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Roland?
What happens if it failed town meeting, to pass town meeting vote?
Oh, my goodness.
Just curious.
It is, it's a great question. And we go back to the drawing board. We renegotiate.
Okay. How many unions are we negotiating with right now?
0 today, but in exactly 3 months, we will have 4 out of the 5. Meaning that either side is able to ask to open up. It's 6 months prior to the end of the contract, which is June 30th. So the 4 that are up on June 30th are AFSCME, which is the Highway, Cemetery, Municipal, Fire, Patrol, and, no, not Fire. AFSCME, Patrol, Superiors, and Dispatch. Fire is 1 more year.
Okay, so that will go to town meeting then, not for this April, but the following April?
Correct.
Unless there's a special town meeting in between, then you have to bring it to the next town meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's an available town meeting,
Yes, next available, good point. Also, in the language, it will say next available town meeting, unless you negotiate otherwise. And we have before, we would have asked to go to the April town meeting. So, because sometimes the residents just want to concentrate on just this one thing that's on that special town meeting. And we've done that too. You try not to, but we've done it.
Jeff?
Thank you very much. I would assume that the comparables is how are we treating our employees compared to other towns, which is on the benefit side. When in the negotiations does the affordability aspects of the town come into play? So the next door neighbor maybe can afford 3 cars, but we can only afford 1 car. How does that factor into the collective bargaining?
Yeah, it's literally from day one, is that usually I'm going to say usually, 100% of the time that I've negotiated, the union has put a salary package as one of their 3 on the table. And really from day one, you look to say, okay, if they're asking for a 2% and they're asking for this, this, and this, and this, the town looking at, okay, this is what, looking at all other budget requirements and whatever is on the table, the goals of the Board of Selectmen from you folks, is that probably we know that if we need to stay within a 3% increase overall, bottom line, but we know that another line's going to take up a lot. We might have to negotiate a 1.5, and that we know from management that's our ceiling. So that's that strategizing before you even begin the negotiation, that working with the finance department, working with Steve Barrett, that you have to already have your strategy and know pretty much what your ceiling is, and you can't go beyond that. And that's the back and forth. And you could say that to the union, to say, this is what we're looking at for a salary adjustment. We don't call it a COLA because it's not a COLA. So if you really are looking for that too, then you're not going to be able to get that increased stipend maybe. So it's really everything. You have to look at everything.
Do the unions generally knowledgeable about things like our reserve status or overlay or having to go for overrides or those kinds of things in the town, or do you?
Most often not. There's some who are more knowledgeable from a financial standpoint, but most are like, that's their career and that's what they do. And that's what we pay them to do. And so they have less knowledge overall of, like, for example, you folks know because you're FinCom members about overlay or debt exclusion or an override. And we would explain that to them so they understand why we're saying no, we're just not being, jerks or whatever. But there's a reason why. But there's a lot of it, and they explain stuff to us. Because when they say that, hey, listen, we need it, we need that extra stuff for our turnout gear, I may not know what that is. It means nothing to me.
Yes, Jason?
You mentioned this, I'd just like to go over it again. Who is representing the town in these meetings? You said the HR director, the town manager, and the subject matter expert for that specific area of expertise. Who else is part of the negotiations from our side?
That's it.
Just the 3. So no representative from the Board of Selectmen, or do the Board of Selectmen have a vote prior to the town meeting, or does it just go straight from the MOA to town meeting?
The board delegates that authority to the town manager and trusts that the town manager knows and has the experience to negotiate. And so the town manager is the person at the table who can say yes or no.
And this may not be a question you can answer, but I see that Janet's in the room, which is always great. Does the Board of Selectmen give guidance to the town manager prior to the openings of each of these negotiations?
I believe general direction is that Steve briefs the board as well. So when we're at a point where we're confident that we may have an agreement with the fire union, and it's generally going to look like this cost-wise, but also they're asking for something that's not the usual, he will brief the Board of Selectmen at one of their board meetings to get their input.
And generally speaking, how many representatives are on the other side? If you've got three?
Oh, well, it can be one, or it could be up to 5 or 6. So usually AFSCME, because they represent 3 departments, you'll have municipal properties representation, cemetery representation, and highway representation, so they might have 5 people at the table, versus the Superiors Union, the sergeants and lieutenants for the police might have 1 or 2.
Thank you.
Depends on how big the union is.
Marianne, on the arbitration, it's binding for public safety employees? Is it binding for, say, the ASME employees, or?
It is not, it just goes, but it's a similar parallel path. So it would go to AAA, it's not the Automobile Association of America, it's the
American Arbitration.
arbitration. And so my opinion, I think that you end up at the same result anyways.
And you don't have to answer this question, but is there any relationship between the expiration of 4 out of the 5 union contracts and the retirement date of the town manager?
I think that it was totally planned for the past 40 years. Oh, is this on? No, it's just, even before Steve Ledoux came to the town, it was the cycle that it was on, and, it is what it is. We're going to miss him. I'm going to miss him.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming out a second night in a row.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Does the school side have a similar collective bargaining process?
I believe they do, yeah. Meaning they have to follow the same Commonwealth laws and everything.
They're under 151.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but I know that they have a similar process.
The difference is the school committee appoints a subcommittee of the school committee to do the negotiations. The superintendent and the staff are not directly involved. And there is no requirement for the school contract to go to town meeting for approval. Different state law, but so, and there's no, I don't believe there's any binding arbitration provision.
No, there isn't, no, yeah.
But I would like to add that if it's in 3 months, that's a good thing, because I kind of hope that we have a tentative budget and affordability understanding before we go to collective bargaining, as opposed to collective bargain, get stuck with a number, and then go to budgets and find out it doesn't work.
That does help us, timing-wise, it does.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where would you like to go next, Mr. Barry? Minuteman?
How about Minuteman, Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Then I'll ask Mike, our Minuteman Building Committee rep and general expert on Minuteman, to give a bit of background.
Well, Minuteman, the Regional Vocational Technical High School currently in Lexington, it's been a long time coming, and there really was a long time need to replace that failing structure. A lot of people in the 16-member towns, of which the Regional Association was originally compromised or composed, worked very hard, to get funding for this new school. One of the compromises was that it was a new regional agreement. Now there are 10-member towns, soon to be 9-member towns once Belmont opts out. I'll just tell for the people that don't know, the 10 towns are Acton, Arlington, Belmont, Bolton, Concord, Dover, Lancaster, Lexington, Needham, and Stowe. Minuteman, we agreed to build the new school. We'll consists of 628 students. It'll have 2 career academies, pretty exciting, a life science and services academy, and an engineering, construction, and trades academy, which will consist of 16 different career and technical education programs. Total cost of this project is $144.9 million. MSBA is kicking in $44 million. I guess the question we're going to talk about tonight is for the capital debt and capital assessment, how are we going to pay for it?
Well said. So we approved the regional agreement, we approved the bonding as one of the member towns for Minuteman. We are now faced with the $250,000 a year debt service. And so the question before the committee tonight is, what do you want to do with it? The options are either have the town or the schools take it into their annual operating budget, because this is $250,000 a year for the next 20 years, or do we do a debt exclusion override, which would require both a ballot question and an approval at April town meeting. Did I get that right, Steve? Right on, sir. All right, so you take over from here.
Well, there's not many more details to fill in, but as has been said, the structure's been replaced. The Minuteman financial folks have started borrowing money, and the debt service schedule has been put out on the streets, and our Acton share of that is, like Steve said, about $250,000. So at the end of the day, we've started the discussion whether we consume that within the ALG plan and the deficit goes up or it gets dealt with, or we add it through a debt exclusion. We've done some preliminary calculations, and if it's handled through a debt exclusion, all else being equal, this one transaction would account or add about 1/3 of 1% onto the average single-family tax bill. So that's how it kind of scales out to the tax bill and to the average single-family tax bill. As the chairman said, there's only really 2 things we can do with it. We can consume it within the ALG plan and negotiate it at that table, or we consider a debt exclusion, which requires a town meeting vote and a ballot vote. At the end of the day, we could, it's a $250,000 decision for 20 years. I suppose, I think we're one of the 2 communities that has not, of all the member communities still standing, I think us and Needham have not voted a debt exclusion, I believe. All the other communities have voted to exclude this from 2.5. But that being said, there's just a couple of options, and we're just getting the discussion going now on it. And this will be on the agenda, I believe, as well for Thursday morning's ALG.
Jason?
Just a clarifying question. If, say, we attempt to go out for the capital override debt exclusion, and we do not muster the 2/3 vote, it does not negate the responsibility, then flows back to having to come out of a general operating budget, correct?
Yes, sir?
Yeah, we're paying for it.
Paying for it,
We're paying for it one way or the other.
The question then becomes, do we want to take on the political work of asking for an override when we are likely going to be asking for a separate capital override for a new twin school within people's recent memory?
Well, the timing of this would probably be April. Might be safer to go in December. I'm not sure. I want to muddy the waters of the December special town meeting with any other issues if we can avoid it. So chances are there may be other things going on in April from a capital standpoint. Yes?
Can I interrupt and ask Janet how many different articles we're expecting to have on December 4th as it stands now?
Sounds like you can ask, you may not get an answer.
Obviously, the schools have the principal proposal. I understand that there are some zoning proposals, and I don't know if the Kelly's Corner infrastructure first segment is going to be on the December special town meeting warrant or not. We heard about it and at our meeting last night, and I think there was a certain amount of discomfort with sort of going forward with the project without further discussion with some of the people who are affected by the proposed easements, that sort of thing, notably the Hosmer House advocates. So I don't know what's going to happen. The only thing I know is going to be definitely on the agenda is aside from the school, is possibly some zoning bylaw amendments or whatever. And then last night, at last night's meeting, the board authorized something that will have no financial impact. It's a proposal to impose a moratorium, agree to a moratorium on the use of any land or buildings for recreational marijuana facilities until the end of 2018. This is a temporary moratorium, and it's basically to allow time for the state commission, the Cannabis Control Commission, to come up with regulations, which it's supposed to do next March, at which point it will be a little clearer how this law is going to work and whether people in the town or the town itself needs to do something more. There is a push. We had a discussion last night. It was supposed to be 10 minutes. I think it took a bit longer, but I cut it short. I mean, it really didn't consume more than maybe a half an hour or so of our time because we just couldn't fit in more time, but the room was packed, and the purpose of the discussion was to talk about a prohibition against any recreational marijuana shops in Acton. The difficulty, however, is that the public in Acton voted in, I think it was November, by a very slight margin to approve or authorize recreational marijuana. And because of that, the process for kind of negating that requires that you have a local ballot vote. And that means that it wouldn't happen until next March, and then you go to town meeting. The moratorium only requires, it's a warrant article. So it would happen sooner, and it's some comfort. I don't know if the proponents of the prohibition are happy with it, but we just decided to just put it on our warrant rather than force them to go out and collect signatures. So
Would it be the Board of Selectmen's preference for us to bring such a capital override item only during the annual town meeting versus a special town meeting? Do you have any, it would be your preference that we do it?
Because I anticipate there are going to be other things.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also respectful of the discomfort that certain FinCom members have about having
You knew where I was going?
too much stuff, cluttering up special town meeting warrants, especially when they have financial import.
So back to Steve, does the timing, whether it be December or April, have any impact on your thought process on this topic?
Pursuant to Minuteman, again, we either get an override vote or we don't. When it happens, it could happen a year or two from now, I think legally. So we just have that $250,000 a year invoice coming due, and it's down to how we're going to pay for it. So as the chair of the board states, April sounds good for that kind of action, in terms of town meeting action, and, that would be fine.
Thank you.
We would, because budgets will have been set, run the risk of, should either the ballot question or the town meeting vote go awry, we would then have to have a supplemental article somewhere along the line in the town meeting warrant to put the $250,000 back in somebody's budget.
You know, it was Mr. McMullen that said that to me. We were going over so the placement of the articles would be important, and you need a backup plan. So, yeah, absolutely, Steve.
All right, historically, the Minuteman assessment has always been treated as a town or municipal item and not an AB item. There's pros and cons to that, but I'm just saying it's never really been considered part of the school budget. I doubt, under these circumstances, this would be a good time to start the discussion. So you were really talking about the town budget being impacted more than the schools, but it's an assessment. There's basically three things we vote on in a town meeting, and that's the town operating budget, the AB school assessment, and the Minuteman assessment. So it's a separate warrant article. With that, I'll ask for a little guidance. What do people think? Mike, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's a tough question. $250,000 is a lot of money, but yet, on the other hand, it's not a lot of money.
Write that down. He's never said that before.
Right. In the sense that theoretically, it could be absorbed in our operating budget on an annual basis, especially when our budget looks in the years when our budget looks healthy. Other years when reserves are lower, that $250,000 looks a lot bigger. I'm saying in our fat years, it's not a problem, but in our lean years, it is. But in order to solve it on a permanent basis, we probably should consider an override, because there would be a debt exclusion, because it is, like as Steve said, 1/3 of 1%. I was just wondering if it goes on forever, or if it is a finite thing like 20 years.
It would have a 20-year life. Well, you probably, 20 years from now, well, hell, we're not going to see it. The 1/3 would fall off your tax bill.
I think in those terms, I don't think it's the people would get that big a hit. So I think it's more affordable that way, and I think it has less impact on our budget.
Other opinions? Christy, what do you think?
I was ready to give an opinion. I think
Really?
Yeah. I never have them otherwise. Given that we're talking about something for a very specific purpose, for a limited amount of time, my natural inclination would be debt exclusion. I just wonder politically whether it'll be difficult to get passed.
Other opinions?
You want to go around the room, or?
I can do that. Jeff?
Question.
No. It's
Well, I
opinion
got a
time.
question. Start everything with a question. Roll forward 5 years and we want to become like Belmont and leave the Minuteman region. Let's say. Are we on the hook for 15 more years of that $250,000?
Yes.
Well, we can't have it both ways. We say in our point of view that things like debt exclusion or special things are for capital and one-time things for the finite life, and we encourage people to go that route. On the other hand, I like to keep our feet to the fire and say, no, you got to work within your budget, affordability, try and find out how you can trade off some of these things, and every year revisit how well we appreciate the Minuteman program and have it part of town meeting discussion, and what does it really cost us to have the number of students that we have there. So the debt exclusion, although it's what we prefer, it also kind of puts things away in the back burner. No one ever sees it again. And I think it does a disservice, especially when you have something positive like Minuteman where you want to brag about it, but be honest about what it really cost us. So I'm in the middle, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Tom?
I guess I question how practical it is to put it in an operating budget. To be honest, we're already operating at a deficit. This would only exacerbate that. It's got to be paid somehow, either through an increase in the levy or tapping into reserves, which are quickly being depleted. So I would opt for the debt exclusion myself. If you're going to put it in an operating budget, I think the school budget, it logically would belong there, whether it's ever been there or not. And it's a bigger budget to begin with. It could absorb it easier. That said, I'd opt for the debt exclusion. I think it's about $33 on a typical tax bill, so it's a manageable number.
Okay. Mike, you got anything you want more to say? Okay. Jason?
So I'm naturally inclined to do a debt exclusion, especially considering the current interest rates, though I am very uncomfortable about doing it at this time. So if it's all the same to Steve as to when we do it, I would like to have the next year or two have it be part of the operating budget. And then once we go take out a larger bond for a larger school, maybe we can take out one bond rather than have to have two separate borrowing costs to do it, and make it one hit at one time for all things school. So I would like to propose a middle way, which is eat it in the budget for a year or two or three, and then when we take out, if we are able to move forward with the school building, twin school building plan, take out one bond at the time for all of the school needs. So I don't know if that's possible, but that is how I would prefer to do it.
Clarification, we wouldn't be bonding this
That's
ourselves.
correct, Mr. Chairman. This is bonded under Minuteman's federal ID number. So they actually proposed 3 sets of borrowings, I think, for this whole school project. And they have their own federal ID number, their own borrowing schedule, so we could not piggyback onto that with that debt exclusion. It's more, as Tom says, it's more of how you get the invoice paid.
So yeah, I think we've been probably saying debt exclusion more than we more correctly should be calling it a capital exclusion, which is just about the same thing. Only in a capital, you don't actually do the debt yourself.
The argument still stands that I'd like to do the capital exclusion all at once rather than go to the town for 2 bites at school's capital exclusion rides. So I would, if it is all the same to Steve, I'd like to have the town budget eat it for a couple of years and do all the schools at once. I would also like to piggyback that I agree with what Tom said about it going into the school committee, but now is absolutely not the time. The school committee is not in a position to take on this level of change at this time.
Okay, Roland?
I'd love to see it go to the schools myself, but we know where we stand with that.
What part of it's not likely to happen this year don't people understand? I've been in ALGs for a long time, and this always comes up, and it always is perfectly logical to say, if these students weren't at Minuteman, they'd be at AB. You'd be paying for them. Why is it you can't pay the assessment? And the answer always comes back, well, that's not the way we do it.
Mr. Chairman, I just mentioned this to Steve B., and I thought I would mention it to you. I think it was last year, because of the departure from the Minuteman district of Boxborough, the AB district agreed to take over the cost for the middle school program, which I think was about $200,000, because the idea was that they wanted Boxborough kids at the junior high level to be able to participate in the program, so Boxborough's going to get billed, and AB is going to take care of the billing. So it was sort of a messy thing, and it required conferring with Minuteman and all that sort of thing, and ultimately everybody decided that was the easiest arrangement. But so they have taken over onto their side of the financing a chunk of the Minuteman budget. So
Yeah, for the newcomers, the Minuteman staffs a junior high, I think, exploratory program that's been taught for years, and they charged, as part of their assessments, the cost of that program. When Boxborough opted out of the Minuteman District and we stayed in, the schools were faced with a problem that technically Boxborough students would not be able to participate in the class if Acton was the only one paying for it. So, so Janet's right, an exception was made. The bill for that program goes to the school district and they apportion it out. I mean, in the end, you know, we're still paying 85% of the bill. Roland, were you done, or?
Sure.
You don't have to be done.
So I agree with Jason, if we can assume it for a couple of years, then do one big bond type thing, that. One big capital override. Yeah, one capital override, go with that approach.
John?
Yeah. Do all member towns in the Minuteman District pay the same $250,000, or?
No, I think it's based on enrollment.
Okay. All right, I would go along with the bonding, and I'm sensitive to Jason's suggestion to defer it for a couple of years. And
Okay.
I have a question.
I thought you were done.
Well, I thought I was too. So what happens if the number of Acton students go down in subsequent years? Are we still on the hook for that $250,000, or does our portion of that go lower? Or if it goes the other way and we have more kids go in, do we pay more of that costs?
The operating cost assessment varies with enrollment. I'm not sure the capital charge does. I think it's just as the point Jeff was making is, if we decided sometime down the road to get out of this, if you remember, when they take out the debt, you're responsible for your share of the debt, whether you're there or not. So I don't think the capital would change.
I just wanted to explain, the capital calculation was modified as part of the amended regional agreement, and it takes into account the sort of the rolling average enrollment, but then it also takes into account, which benefits Acton, the wealth factor, so that another town with the same number of students but a higher wealth factor would be paying more than Acton. Acton actually gets a break on the capital contribution because Acton, relative to some of the other communities, is not as wealthy, which is bizarre because we're not exactly impoverished here, but no. So it was interesting because the calculation of the capital contribution was not as dramatic a change for Acton as it was for some other communities, like the wealthy communities like Concord got a bigger hit as a result of the adjusted formula that they used to calculate the capital contribution.
Does the capital contribution change every year?
I don't know the details. That's the sort of thing you guys can look into. It's like, it really floats your boat, so.
I think it's based on a four-year rolling average, as well as other factors, as Janet just mentioned. For example, if our bill is $250,000, Arlington, which has, we have maybe 36 kids, they have 119 kids there. Their bill's about 1.5 or 1.6 million. And they're actively seeking new towns to join the regional district. And there is interest by a number of towns like Watertown and some others that would like to join. So there are opportunities for these numbers to change. I'm not sure how they will change. But most likely the region will grow versus decline.
Christine? Stop taking notes.
It seems to me that we don't have the capacity at this time to roll it into the budget. As much as I would like to, I think that we should go with the debt exclusion.
Okay. We going on again? Christine?
I had one question. Would the regionalization that we have right now and Boxborough not being a part of Minuteman, would it ever be possible to roll our Minuteman assessment into the school's budget actually, including this capital? Or because the general school budget is split between Acton and Boxborough, would that not be possible?
Wouldn't be easy. There's a way you could do it. I mean, these 30 whatever kids are Acton kids. I mean, you could do a pro forma calculation of if they were in the AB system, what would the split between the two towns be? So, yeah, it's a way to do it. I just don't think it's going to be very practical. Tom?
Steve, I just want to say that I hadn't thought of Jason's idea, and I'm supportive of that.
Don't get used to it.
Yeah, don't worry.
All right. That's all we really have to do tonight. This is going to come up on Thursday morning at the Acton Leadership Group Conference, and I wanted to get a feel for where the committee was, and my sense is that longer term, we believe a capital exclusion would be the way to go, though we certainly could see absorbing it into, for lack of, be more specific, the town budget for a year or two. All right, moving on to FY17. Mr. Barrett's now going to give us some good news.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Noticing the time, been a long day for the folks on the committee.
Wait, it's not the last item on our agenda.
Well, we do have the hill that starts tomorrow at 8 a.m. down at the PSF, so thank you very much for having me in tonight. Sorry Brian wasn't here. I'm assuming he'll be back in for your next meeting. I'm here to discuss at a high level the FY17 results of operation. You know, by way of introduction, I'm not sure anybody talks Celtics basketball, but we have a big three in town finance. You know, it's important for the committee to understand who's handling the $1 billion in transactions every 4 years. Town accountant Lisa Wojcik's been with the town 23 years. The FinCom liaison, Brian McMullen, has been with the town 25 years. I'm kind of the kid of the group. I've been with the town 17 years. What's not up there is, in a prior life, I was a partner in a firm that audited cities and towns for 15 years. So I've pretty much been working municipal finance since 1984. But you know, I welcome the new members of the committee, and I look forward to working with all of you and trying to show you how we do what we do. So, you know, where are we? Where do we see us? Well, as you know, we are a AAA bond-rated community. We have an outstanding tax collection rate, and from an auditor perspective, that makes the whole thing turn. 99.9% collection on a current year fiscal basis really keeps you out in front of problems, and it allows you not to spend a lot of resources chasing old receivables. We have a lot of award-winning services, we'll get to that, an excellent school system. As Mary Ann said, on some levels, we have a stable contractual environment. We only have I think for FY19, we have the fire department signed. The other unions are up, but that's a natural course of operations, so, you know, we're very comfortable there. You know, we don't spend a lot of time looking at awards or recognitions. There's just not enough time for it, but that being said, we do have the GFOA CAFRA award, and to me, being a former auditor, it's almost like the audit report when I left the industry was about 35 pages. You'll see the CAFRA now, it's probably 140 pages. CAFRA is a comprehensive annual financial report. To me, it's an audit on steroids. It lists 10-year trend data for a lot of different types of things. If anyone in the committee is having trouble sleeping, you can look it up online. The CAFRA is up there. The little award is on there too. Our transportation program has won awards, our nursing program has won awards. We're active with green initiatives, and as the residents know at the table, this thing called electric aggregation, I think might be an option to help folks save some money. So we're very proud of what we do. To the real kind of meat and potatoes of the presentation, we can make money on both sides of the ball, so to speak, on the revenue side and the expense side. On the revenue side, and it gets a little weedy in terms of how the Department of Revenue does things, but we're going to return about $800,000 back into reserves on the revenue side of the house. The biggest one, or the one that everybody talks about, is motor vehicle excise. We were up about $200,000 based on our budget for that. And that's, out of our local receipts of about $5 million, that represents about $3.5 million worth of budget there. Large licenses and permits had a large change. We were up about $500,000 there. However, in reviewing the detail, we isolated one item, which is Insulet Corporation up in North Acton. Embedded in our fee calculations or our fee receipts was a $250,000 permit fee from those folks for that construction. So, even though it's kind of a one-time hit, Department of Revenue will recognize it as it is, and that was very good to the bottom line. Meals tax. We had a budget of about $225,000. That came in at $309,000. So if you remember the debate at town meeting, we were lucky that everybody didn't leave town to have their meals when that 0.75% surcharge was added. So, we had very favorable activity in excise, in licenses and permits. They're very busy on the land use side. That's kind of on the, on the revenue side, we did fine. To kind of cap it for you, our total revenue is probably about $90,000. So that's about close to 1% on the revenue side. So on the expense side, as the committee knows, even though the ALG plan says we spend about $90 million, about $34 million of that goes to the town for operations. We have a bottom line operating budget that's voted on at town meeting, and we returned about $334,000, which again is at about 1% of total spending. The reality of it is there are about 24 different town departments. Our financial system gives them all a departmental budget, and you'll see that in our accounting. But at the end of the day, when we tally up at the end of the year, there's pluses and minuses everywhere. There's just a natural, no way of things. In terms of high level for the committee, okay, 334, what was in there? Well, in behind the scenes, you'd see there was a positive for the finance department. Well, we carry benefits in there. We had a bunch of prepayment discounts for our insurance, for our retirement assessment. So we had about a $400,000 positive in the finance department's budget. It sounds like a lot of money, but a lot of different cost centers are housed in there. That budget for FY17 was probably $10.5, $11 million, so that's not a big turn back. We consumed $139,000 deficit in snow and ice. That's embedded in that number. State law allowed us to carry that over and to spend next year's money, but the town manager opted to make us work it through the bottom line budget and consume that deficit. Those were the two big ones. We had a deficit in legal services in the town manager budget, mostly attributable to the CPC lawsuit that maybe you heard about. So, 1% turn back on the expense side, was pretty close to the pin. So here I'm going to do something that I haven't done in 17 years. I'm going to estimate free cash before it's certified by the state.
Well, you give it a range.
It's generally not good job security to do this, especially with the boss's boss in attendance. But So we started the year at 4.8 million. We spent, 2.6 million, I think, at town meeting, plus we spent some money on River Street acquisition. So, we had some outputs from free cash. We have the replenishments. I think we're going to settle in at about 3 to 3.5 million. We expect DOR certification by October 31st. The committee is filled with CFOs at the table. The DOR certification process, there's a checklist, there's balance sheets. The reporting package is about 4 inches thick. The Department of Revenue representative comes out here, reviews the data with us. This data includes enterprise fund, financial results. So I never thought 17 years ago we were that complex. Now things are starting to feel a little complex. So it's a pretty complete certification and submittal. Kind of as a segue, our auditors should be out probably within a few weeks to do the audit. A little off course, but I figured why not? What's happening on the FY19 budget front? Because that's something out in front for the committee. Well, it just happens to be that tomorrow and Thursday, and these are private meetings, Chairman Noon, so you probably could attend, but these are private meetings. But we have 2 days of a internal budget retreat where the department heads get up in front of their peers and they discuss their operating budget for FY19 as well as their capital request. I've seen that meeting run different ways over the last 2 decades. It prepares the department heads for Budget Saturday, which some of the new committee members haven't been through, but it's a little bit like the Inquisition where the department heads get up here and pitch their budgets and their capital. So this is a little bit of a dress rehearsal. And so we have that tomorrow and Thursday. And then Thursday morning, ALG meets at 7:30 a.m. in here, where we'll work the FY19 plan and work some other things. This next slide I think you're going to like. Any questions, just ask. So I'm working on my PowerPoint skills. Usually McMullen does a lot of this for me, but I really appreciate the committee's time and let me give you a glimpse of what we saw for FY17.
All right, well, before I turn it over to the committee members, I'll ask the question I always ask. Nursing revenue?
Been doing this too long. So nursing revenue, about $338,000.
All right. Okay, committee members, questions for Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
You must have done a pretty good job. I don't think Brian's ever not gotten a question, and he does it. Well, Jeff, you have a question. There he goes.
My favorite. You have your favorite, I have my favorite. Internally, do the staff and the town manager have key performance indicators that they kind of share and understand how they're getting better?
So are you talking like financial metrics, or are you talking, I guess at the beginning of the Hill, there'll probably be a quick discussion on the current ALG plan, where that sits, maybe where our reserve levels are. In terms of, key metrics and how we're getting better, I think the town manager's office has put a good amount of money into some professional development for all of us. There's been some different management training programs that we've attended. I think it was a Stephen Covey, a company that's out there, and it's management training. It's showing the department heads where we fit in, who our customers are. For example, the FinCom is one of my customers. And so, we try to share metrics, both financial data, and we also, the town manager convenes a budget group from it's almost year-round now. It consists of the town manager, the assistant town manager, myself, the assistant director of finance, the town accountant, and we also have a department head kind of outside the system, and this year Frank Widmeyer, our former retired police chief, he kind of functions as a budget analyst. So routinely, we call department heads in, and we, we roll through their data, and we share at length.
Right, so give you some examples. We said at town meeting that we were going to have some certain performance that was going to improve by having pay-as-you-throw. We were going to increase our recycling. We were going to do a variety of things. Rightly or wrongly, I would think that one of the good things would be to say, okay, so what happened? What is our goal? How are we doing as a town? Another example might be that over the years it cost us a certain amount of money per mile to maintain our roads, and we added 10 miles, but we didn't increase our budget, so we've improved over time the cost of maintaining our roads. The school might have a metric on cost per student and how they're trying to do those kinds of things. So those would be the type of internal, I'm not saying necessarily we publish them, but it certainly would be kind of nice to be able to look back on what our commitments were and show the measurement of those on time.
Well, I think, for example, DPW, depending on what kind of data they put together for Budget Saturday, you'll see what our Chapter 90 commitment plus our general fund commitment means we replace roads every 25 years. And where does that stand in the standard? So, Jeff, I think the days of traditional financial performance measures, they're all changing now. And that's good. They're more like, okay, how many fires do we have? You work around non-financial indicators, and I think we're getting better at that, but it's slow to come, but you'll see some stuff on Budget Saturday.
And Jeff, if as Steve said earlier, if you are having trouble sleeping, starting on about page 100 of the annual audit report is 10 years worth of just about every metric I can think of, not just financial.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. There's, the CAFR has, it gets kind of boring, but there's a few pages, how many municipal buildings, how many streets mile.
You got to get through 100 pages of footnotes.
See, I love that stuff. I go on vacation reading that stuff, but you can't get enough of it where I come from. But
apparently you don't like mysteries because you got to know how that one ends.
But my question was more about information as opposed to data.
Well, and that's
then you have to look at the data and infer whether you can get information out of it.
I mean, you bury all this stuff in there, but the answer to the question is, did we succeed or not? And if we didn't, fine. Why?
Well, as a former auditor, Jeff, as you know, the first class you take, they tell you when you get the financial statements, don't read them from the front in, read them from the back out. Read the footnotes first, because the footnotes contain the data to help you understand what happened. And I do believe we're hitting as many of the marks as we have. In fact, the former chairman of the Finance Committee, one of the metrics she asked us to look at, I think I remember the ALG meeting where she said, hey, does anyone take the average single-family tax bill that's proposed in the ALG plan and then go and look at the actual? And I remember we all looked around at each other and said, whoa, geez, that's a good one. Well, we went back and did it for her, and pretty much out of the last 5 or 6 years, we've beaten it except for one. Now, there was 1 year we just mauled it. I don't know what happened. We might have had a supplemental appropriation, but that was a really good exercise where Margaret said, hey, you told town meeting this is what the average single-family tax bill was going to go up. What was the actual calc once you set the rate? So we're coming around with those kind of measurements. It's not easy, though.
Yes, Jason.
You just said that the excise tax came in how much to the better than the,
It came in about $204,498.
about $204,498.
That's about, yeah.
You have the sense on that?
Okay.
I don't, sir.
So that was the upside. What was the projected number?
Yeah, the budget was $3,225,000, and it came in at $3,429,000.
And what did you project, what have you put in the projection for the 2018 budget?
I don't have that at my hands right now. If anything, it was probably up, it might have been up 5% on the 3.2 million, because it would have had no basis to bring it up more than that. I can get that for you though, Jason.
But you did bring it up.
We're going to propose bringing it up for 19. The FY18 tax rate will be setting, in December, but for FY19 budgeting purposes, we're going to bring that additional revenue in. It'll help lower the deficit as well.
But you can still bring it in for 2018, right?
We can give DOR, depending on where we stand with collections, they like to go, they'll probably let us go up through the actual, so, that'll help us for 18 as well, yeah, that will.
So you are going to adjust it for 2018?
We're going to do our best to convince the State Department of Revenue that based on FY17's actuals, we can get so much in 18, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's move on to the point of view. While Jason's getting organized, I heard from a few committee members, but I heard no substantive disagreement with the document. Is that true, or were some of you just holding your fire for tonight? I mean, well, I'll be glad to go through slide by slide, because I've noted the, but if we got a big argument, I'd rather get going on it now.
I'd like to start by saying that it has definitely been brought to my attention that both Christy and Christine did the vast majority of the rewrites on this. So while this document is...
Oh, and I thank Roland?
And you thank me and Roland, and me and Roland are making sure to step back and make sure that Christy and Christine get the appropriate credit. Sorry, Roland, I appreciate you coming here tonight. Thanks for working on the 3 hours, but they did a huge amount of the rewrite. I'm sure you would concur. Thank you. So thank you, Christy and Christine. I find it much more readable, and that's a wonderful thing. So I'm going to go through this hopefully relatively quickly, and hopefully for the last time so that we can move to a vote on the topic. Any problems with slide 3? Any problems with slide 4? 5? I'm looking at Jeff because he furrowed his brow. You good with this one? 6?
Well, this is where I kind of would hope, if it's possible, 5 talks about median. And one of the things about median is that it really does kind of bifurcate the town, and we don't lose sight of the lower half of income people, and I'm an advocate of them. When we go to average, it gets skewed because there are more wealthy people in town. So 5 does say median. I think we have the same median data on you can do median percent family income.
Yes. But you can't find the median tax rate. Average tax rate is out there, but I could not find median tax rate.
But the
data.
It's true that it's mixing a little bit, because it does say, but you could do median of X percent family income as our average taxes. And we have the data for 10 through 15 of median income.
I can grab the median income and I can use the average tax rate number, but I don't have a median tax rate number, so
Right,
it's,
no, I understand that.
it's,
But
It's not the
I
same thing.
understand, is it,
if we use the median number, while your percentage goes up, the percentage goes up in both numbers, equivalently.
yeah, it doesn't change the relationship, but
Right.
it shows that it's another percentage higher for the median. It just gives a bigger,
But is it accurate to compare the average tax rate to the median income?
Jeff, we had this discussion that night at length. I mean, we must have spent at least a half an hour, remember we discussing that? And
We decided we wanted to make sure that on any given slide, we were using like-for-like numbers on any given slide.
all right. Well, this is not a showstopper for me. I'm just bringing it up because whenever we can, I really like to stress with my mathematical background, the median in this case is a better indication, I think, of the issues that we're facing.
I consider it my goal going forward to find
It's not
those
your fault
numbers
that you can't get the
for our use, if nothing else.
The other, on 6, I'm wondering, since we have now the comparative data for contiguous towns, should we make a remark that our 2015 average is, whatever it is, lower than Concord, but higher than...
I'm
just to put-
hesitant to do that unless we do all 16 towns. And if we do all 16 towns, I'm told that that's too many words on a page.
That would be.
So I'm very concerned about picking a relatively small number of towns, and then we're opened up immediately to, will you cherry pick the towns, and we're going to get pushback from both sides that we're cherry picking the towns that we're comparing ourselves to in a relatively small subset.
But would Westford and Concord be good representatives, one on the upper end, one on the lower end? And that's it. They're adjoining and,
Well, I think, the number itself is kind of sitting there in isolation. There's a little bit about trend, but, we're not really saying, is this a good number or is it a bad number? It's a stable number. And I don't know that there is a good number or a bad number, but, the only comparison you can make is to another town or two.
Well, I do think this speaks, though, directly to Jeff's desire for an affordability metric. In and of itself, in a vacuum, just for the town itself, this is an affordability metric for the town in a vacuum of what the other towns are. If this number were significantly growing, then it is more indicative of a larger problem.
I agree with that. All I'm getting at is, if I look at that number, I don't know whether I'd be better off living in Acton, Boxborough, Concord, Westford,
Is the point to speak to that, or is the point to speak to the fact that as a percentage of income, our town's actually holding?
We were trying to do this strictly from an affordability perspective, not necessarily from a comparatives.
I know, but once you open it,
Okay. This is me trying to close that can of worms?
I understand. And I'm not saying we have to change the slide. I'm just saying it's a number that kind of sticks out, and nobody reading this document will have a fundamental way to evaluate it.
We could put all,
Other than to say it was stable.
we could put all the other town data we have in the appendix and refer to it.
That's true. Let's do that.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
So that's based on Acton, Westford, Concord, Sudbury, Boxborough, and Littleton.
That's fine.
I have a question about why we can't calculate the median tax bill if we know the median home value and know what the tax rate is at that time.
Math.
Okay.
It didn't occur to me.
We can take that as a note for next year's point of view.
Next year? Next year. Excellent.
Thank you. Slide 7.
Slide 7, somebody asked us to spell out average.
Somebody asked us to spell out average entirely. Okay.
Yeah, average.
were you going to put like dotted lines and stars or something so that, for the colorblind people, they can, I mean, thank you very much for doing it ABC, top to bottom, but some people might not know
You
which
mean
one is
just,
which.
yeah, triangles or stars. It might be a good idea because the document won't always necessarily be reproduced in color.
What's this bottom line? What's that say? Is that
Not that it's the best, to be a bestseller around town, but.
Officially, we got yelled at last year by the librarian because people came in and asked for a copy of the point of view and they couldn't find it. So I got an earful from the librarian. So just
Jason,
for the record.
since we're nitpicking, on number 6, can we move the notation up above the page number? It's kind of right on top of it.
The
Yeah,
appendix notation?
I'm on it.
No, it's just the equation, average family tax bill. It's right on top of the page number.
On 6? On slide 6?
Yeah. We'll move the equation. We'll left justify the equation. I hear it.
On income? On the bottom?
Yeah.
Are you showing the bottom too, because it's not showing the, see Appendix A for spring data that's at the bottom of the screen?
I'm not seeing that at all.
Yeah, it's on the one I sent you though, so is it on?
This is what I've got on the screen now is what Steve forwarded to the finance committee.
Yeah.
So, where, when, okay.
We'll take care of it.
Yeah?
7, 8.
Going back to the chart. Just my usual nit, charts, when you talk about scale, really, to not be, it's a sort of corruption of or the exaggeration of the gap. Charts should always start at 0 and go to the highest scale. Here, we're starting at 95%, and so you're just looking at the gap between.
Now,
This increase would be much flatter.
Well, I was told to index this to 1.
I'm going to overrule that objection and say, I think the last time we discussed it, it was like that, and the problem was that the 3 lines were up at the top of the chart and you couldn't see a difference.
Actually,
That's how it is, though.
actually, Mike, if I may point out, the more accurate for this would be 0 would be the 100%. And it would be -5 below it, and then +5, +10, plus, in terms of the growth from being 0%. So
That's just labeling a
it's just
y-axis.
labeled different. The x-axis is labeled, could have been labeled 0 and with a -5% below it, and then +5, +10, +5, and then it would have ended up at a 20% growth.
It's also typical to
So it's
start.
really not 100% growth. If you're talking about dollars, then it would start at 100% and go up to 120, but you're talking about the growth rate.
Okay, we'll change the
So
access.
it will address Mike's issue of scale.
We'll change the access. 8, 9. Good with 9. 10's good. Everyone comfortable with this as a scale for immediate, medium, and long term?
Yeah, the other thing, should the P in pre-K
Be capitalized?
capitalized?
Yeah, slide 11.
Pre and a K.
Slide 11.
Capitalized P, K.
I have a question about this relative to another slide, where it discusses which of the schools will be replaced.
What slide, have we gotten to it yet?
It's in the recommendations. Just here you say explicitly Gates and Douglas. The twin school will replace Gates and Douglas, and then there's a later slide that says 2 of the elementaries and lists Gates, Douglas, and Conant.
Okay.
Correct.
Slide 21.
Yep. Okay.
And you do have P and K capitalized on slide 21 also.
Okay, can you make it consistent between the 2 slides? So I went back to the school to try and get an update on this 4.4 number. I was unable to get a hard commitment Yep, they did not understand my question, though asked 4 times in 4 slightly different ways. I suspect this will be a topic at ALG on Thursday morning.
Yeah, just so you know, I'm not at all sure we'll get all these changes, certainly not necessarily the nitpicks, but Jason and I will be having a meeting at ALG on Thursday morning. This is probably the version of the document, unless we want to clean up a couple things tomorrow.
Well, anything that's just simple cleanup I can do.
We will basically talk to this document at ALG.
Okay. Good with 12? 13? This is the 2.11 number that you gave me? You're good with that number?
Yep.
Good. Everyone good at 13? Whoa, 14?
I had a hold on that.
On 14?
Yeah, I just thought, this goes where it says land purchases incur costs and result in lost tax revenue. I thought a balancing comment. However, land purchases eliminate residential development and increases in the school population.
So yeah, probably there ought to be a bullet like that, and then just the concern is that are we correctly balancing the two?
Say it again. What do you want the second bullet to be?
You could have, okay.
Land purchases limited.
However, frequently eliminate residential development. You don't have to add, including 40Bs, and increasing the school-age population.
Land purchases, however, limit development.
Residential development, and the increase of the school population.
And subsequent.
You're talking about conservation.
Yeah, open space,
Yeah,
land purchases, yeah.
Well, even.
Any land purchase does that,
Like
actually.
River
No,
Street.
not if you build 40
Not-
Bs on it.
Right, well,
Yeah, you don't. That was the point.
But those aren't concerns then.
Pardon?
Well, the concern is are we correctly balancing?
Okay. It just needs to be phrased that way.
okay. Do you all trust me to wordsmith
Yes.
that one properly? Thank you. Okay. 15?
Just one comment. Reserve policy floor. I would think people in town meeting may not feel as comfortable. I thought perhaps an alternative would be reserve policy minimum level would kind of make more sense to people. It's a minimum level of the reserve.
And it's more words.
We do discuss floor later on, define it later on in the document, though.
2 slides later so that we can jump into it, but because we're in the concern section, no, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, we call them thresholds.
Okay, here we are at 17. Upper and lower thresholds.
Yeah, I think the word is not set upper and lower thresholds. I think it's stick to upper and lower thresholds on the reserves.
No.
We've set them, I thought, but the recommendation is you stick to them as opposed to setting them. And the second thing I would encourage us perhaps to say is, instead of encourage using reserves for one-time items, I think the sense of the committee was encourage only using reserves for one-time items.
Or limit.
Or limit because
We
they're
don't
being
want to
used for
encourage.
many things, right?
As long as you keep to the word encourage.
Yeah, no, I would leave the word encourage, but say only for that purpose, as opposed to encourage for that purpose and the others that we typically use them for.
Encourage only using reserves.
You know?
I didn't tinker with that, because we in fact the pattern is to use reserves to meet operating expenses.
But we're trying to get away from that.
And we're trying to get away
That's not
from
going to
that.
happen.
but you don't ever, because of the things like the DOR budgeting rules, there's almost always going to be some, a limit, or, actually, I'm fairly comfortable with the wording we got.
Do I need to change the word set to adhere to?
Yes.
Fine, done. Am I making a change to the second bullet? Am I adding the word only? Yeah,
No,
put the word
no,
encourage.
leave the words the way, it gives
Okay.
a little more wiggle room.
So we'll change the word set to adhere to. 18.
I don't know that we have to say greater emphasis on the schools as opposed to just maintain their current funding policy.
You getting soft on me now?
I had a decent OPEB report this time around. I haven't seen the town, so I can't necessarily say, yeah, I mean. I don't
Change the
know.
word greater to continued?
Yeah,
And we're happy?
yes.
You are getting soft on me. Change, change
I'd like to have some data to back up what I say.
greater to continued.
He's data dependent.
Okay. 19.
I don't understand this top bullet point.
There is, so we're at 19 here. Facility. If we have a handyman or a skilled technician on staff who goes and does a specific job within any of the school facilities buildings, we are able to pay them at that predetermined negotiated salary rate. If we have to do things out of district, we have to pay a prevailing wage, and it ends up costing us significantly more than being able to do it in-house. So what we're trying to drive home on this bullet point is where we can address the capital improvement plan needs by using in-house resources rather than going out to bid at prevailing wage. It ends up being the most cost-effective way of retiring the risk in the SIP.
Should we start it then with save money by?
Yeah, that would be a good way to do it.
Facility should save money by using in-house reserves where possible. Slide 19. Slide 19. Facility should save money. Great. Any other changes on this slide?
No.
20. We're all good with this one, right? We've jawboned this one enough times? 21. So this one, actually, this is probably the biggest one in this, from my perspective. The biggest point in this whole point of view. Do we have the Finance Committee's consensus that we are recommending building a new twin school?
As far as, based on what we know now, but we're going to know some more in a couple of weeks.
I also.
So it just, because we put it in a point of view doesn't mean we automatically vote to support the detailed proposal when it comes to town meeting, because it may look different.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Isn't this the one that Chrissy commented on, about the Douglas Gates Conan?
Yeah.
Said, so we're leaving the
No,
Douglas Gates.
this verbiage is more accurate than on the previous slide. I will make the previous slide
Okay.
reflect this
All right.
verbiage. 22.
I got a note from Bob saying he read both sentences to say the same thing.
Well, that may be because I'm using it as a cudgel and I want the point made across, brought across. He's not wrong. He is not wrong. But I'm definitely trying to say this in a couple of different ways to make it clear that this is our position.
Okay.
'23.
Yeah, I had, again, I thought the first bullet was good. In the second, I'd have a balancing comment. It says reserves, which in substantial part are accumulated by revenues exceeding projections, and their use has been to maintain the existing level of town and school services. I can give that.
We're trying to get away from that.
I know you're trying to get away from that, but, let's talk about what the reality is and give balance to what we have been doing and what we're likely to continue to do, and not box ourselves into something when, hey, we said this in the point of view, but here we go, using reserves again. In order to maintain the level of services that we have, which I think the people want, it has to be paid for somewhere, and that does, come out of reserves. And the point is that these reserves are generally they're derived from revenues which exceed projections. They're not one-time slugs of.
I would disagree a little bit on that. If you look at where the vast majority of the recent reserves have come from, they've come, I believe, a fair chunk of it came from the, was it Grace or Neswick?
Neswick.
The
Well, that
Neswick,
was years ago.
well, we're still bleeding that off.
That may have all been.
I think it's. So we're all, if you look at what was just presented tonight by Steve Barrett, they asked for 2.6 million in reserves, and they gave us 1.3 million in turnbacks.
It wasn't in.
Yes, it was 2.6 that they asked for in reserve use capability, and
Right.
they used 1.3 in turnbacks. And then we got 1.3 in turnbacks. So,
Well, the schools would have also turned back something
I think the
on the 2.6, I think. Anyway, I don't think the slide acknowledges the use of reserves to cover budget shortfalls, so that's fine. And we're repeating, and we kind of reworded the other slide to basically say, and maybe we have to say similar words in the second bullet point, that in the future we encourage the use of reserves for capital projects and leave it at that. But for the most part, there is some bleeding of reserves. It's not 2.6 million, because when you account for all the turnbacks, it probably is $700,000-800,000 a year. So I don't think it's correct to say we can never use them for covering operating expenses, because we haven't, and we probably will continue to do it at some level.
that's why it's a should, not a
Of
must.
less than $1 million. But by and large, we should be looking at using essentially what one-time money for one-time expenses. And when I say one-time money, I'm not talking about the turnbacks that occur every year. I'm talking about the Neswick, the unspent warrant articles of 5 years ago. That these won't repeat.
But a significant part of how we've accumulated reserves is where the revenues have exceeded the projections as we came out of a faltering economy, with people buying cars, new growth,
Well, there's
additions to houses.
There is, just by Department of Revenue regulations, a disincentive to accurately forecast revenues. We should almost always beat the local receipts because they kind of make you forecast based on 2 years ago.
Well, it should
actuals.
be a conservative forecast, or else people will
Right,
get too greedy.
and that's why the Department of Revenue has that
Yeah.
regulation. So we should almost always beat it. So to the extent you want to allocate less than $1 million to covering budget shortfalls, because you're going to recover it in revenue or expense turnbacks, that's fine. To the extent you start going into the $2.5 and $3 million, to cover operations, that's not fine, because that won't be
No, that's different,
replenished.
yeah, that's.
And I think that's the point we're trying to make here, and the question is, are we making it clearly? I mean,
Do we want to have a bullet, do we want to have a bullet in the middle that says that acknowledging that turnbacks turnbacks as a result of unexpected revenue or less than forecast expense? Getting wordy here. Do we want to have a bullet in the middle where we say that we're okay with allocating use of free cash as long as it is commensurate with an anticipated turnback?
No, that's too technical.
But that's the spirit of what you're trying to get.
Right. But you do.
Well, to a specific amount.
Well, that's why I don't want to have the concept of turnbacks in here at all. That's why I want to leave it as it should. It should be used for one-time capital projects.
I'm happy with the slide as it is if we just, on the second bullet, ended at capital projects.
Okay, that's fair. That's fine.
Well, then, if you're right there.
Got it? 24? We good with this one?
Should be Finance Committee, not Financial Committee.
Picky.
Oh, I mean, yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. 25.
This one kind of left me hanging a bit at the end. As I read it, we're using the tax levy, unused tax levy, to balance the operating budget. That's only a part of it, right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's the 1/3, so we're kind of silent on how we're otherwise closing the gap.
Correct. That's by intention. Jason and I are going to have to go to an ALG meeting, and we're going to have to have some flexibility in getting to a consensus. Do I have a number of what I think we should be using for reserves in my head? Sure. And before we commit to anything, we'll all have a chance to discuss and vote on it. But right now, since we haven't even seen a hard budget number yet, I don't want to close so many doors that we've backed ourselves into a corner.
Is your objection that it sounds like we're balancing the entire operating budget just by using the 1/3?
That's what I,
Okay.
yeah.
So then we
So-
should add something to say that some will come from reserves.
Okay.
To help balance the
So,
budget. or something.
yeah, to help balance. And, yeah, if I add the word help there, to help balance, does that make it more clear that we're not doing the complete, good?
Okay.
I'm adding one word, Christine, I'm adding one word.
Help balance the operating budget. Yeah, need that D there too. Have to balance.
Fine, 2 words. Okay, fine. Okay, I'm adding the word help. 26. There's
Nothing there.
27.
Okay. So, once again, I'll repeat. By voting to approve this point of view, you are not voting to approve any particular project, any particular budget, any particular item. You're merely voting to approve that this is our point of view for this year. And if you do so, it will be transmitted in some substance, probably not slide by slide, Thursday morning to the other members of ALG.
I'm sure Janet wants to go through it again on Thursday morning.
I think I'll spare them that. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the point of view
Motion to approve the point of view
as
as
amended.
amended.
Yeah.
Second.
Discussion.
Jeff, you have discussion? No. Very good.
Any discussion? All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. It passed.
Yay.
Excellent work, people.
And again, thank you, Christine, Roland, for all of your work on this, and for everyone who met with me for coffee over this as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. I know it was a lot of work because I've done this. It wasn't easy, and you stuck with it. All right. Quick update on upcoming meetings. On October 10th, the schools will be in to talk about the building project, talk about enrollment, and their FY17 results. On October 24th, we'll have a presentation on the town's sustainability policy. With that, I'll go to committee reports. Does anybody have a committee? Roland.
CPC met after our last FinCom meeting on that Thursday. They are not going to be bringing the River Street project to, they have not received an application from the town yet, so that will not be going to the fall town meeting, special town meeting, so I don't know if it's going to be going.
As long as I get one eventually.
I don't know if it's going to be going in the spring at this point, so, but there might be a land purchase coming our way, from what I heard from the corner of Arlington and Newtown, as a contiguous piece that connects more property together.
They bought that 2 years ago.
It did, that was that other parcel, but I think there's another parcel that might be one of them with the home site. You see the two signs, one of them says they're both for sale. I think it might be one of those to buy the land to, yeah, to connect together.
One mosquito infected swamp to another.
Something like that.
Okay, other committee reports. John?
Committee. There was a meeting last Thursday night. It was consisted of the steering committee members, also a group of members of the Economic Development Committee. Mike was there, Steve was there, as well as town staff. The principal, this is a key update on the situation. Stop and Shop owns the Kmart parcel. They have decided not to renew Kmart's lease, which expires in April of '21, and they want to make an attempt to develop that parcel. They have partnered with a Concord developer named Adam Winstanley, who has worked with them before, and they've partnered on these projects. And he, talked to us about the idea, well, look, what people like now, they like walking, instead of developing a belated town center. We'll never have a town center like Concord has or Lexington has, but how can we make some attempt, a beginning attempt, to do something down there with the idea that future developments will come over, a cycle of 20 years. His idea for the parcel was a mixed-use parcel on the Main Street side, sort of two-story commercial development, upscale retail stores or restaurants on the first floor, not chain restaurants, more specialty restaurants, with professional office space, doctors, up on the second floor. Then a main drive through the property where there would be residential rental units on both sides of the road. Now these would be 1 and 2 bedroom high-end apartments, which would basically provide housing for older people who would like to stay in town, sell their sell their properties, and then younger professionals without children who would eventually later, move out. It's not meant as a kids community. And then on the other side, perhaps mixed-use, commercial, residential, all parking, that would be it, all parking downstairs. There was generally, I think, a very favorable reaction, gentlemen, to this, and we asked him to come up with something, more substantial. Jason, key to remember in this is, in order to get this done, zoning would have to pass for mixed-use development. Kmart, unfortunately, will be gone from the site. If we do nothing with it, Kmart can sell to a developer who could turn around and build a massive 40B complex in there, which you would have little to no control over. 40B trumps the existing commercial zoning for the property. So real keys in this are the idea you've got to work with developers. Nancy Tavernier had a sensational anecdote. Lincoln has no 40Bs. They work with developers to put in housing, that works for everybody. Works for the developer, works for the town. Mr. Winstanley talked about here, he would have 10% of the units affordable, where in a 40B it's about 25% now. Affordability, runs a broad spectrum. Affordable, low income, these would be apartments at about, $1,600 a month, whether people could get subsidies for it is something else. But, my key takeaway is, and I think the takeaway from others, was that you've really got to, work with the developer. This fellow seems like an awfully classy, guy. He's not some, blowhard who's going to, come in and damn the torpedoes full speed ahead. I'm going to do this, get on board with me. So any comments from Mike and Steve who?
I thought it was good. That's exactly what Winstanley equivalent is exactly what Kelly's Corner needs. It's someone, not a committee, but someone, specific developer that has a vision. That's his vision, and that it makes sense. It's well thought out. He was able to paint that picture of what the possibilities are. I think where we got off track last time was talking about height of buildings and different roof styles, and people's head were going to explode. But this, you need to you needed someone to say, this is what we could do with the site. This is what it would look like, and so on. And I think he needs to obviously flesh it out some more to get more specific, but I think he's the kind of guy that can move this project forward, and we got to look to our future, because you don't want a job lot, big box warehouse store to replace Kmart, which could be a possibility. We need to grease the skids to get this kind of development going, if that's in fact what we want.
Yeah, I would only add that as our former member, Doug Tyndall, who is the only member of the committee with a lot of commercial real estate background, would say, and often said about the last attempts at Kelly's Corner, was you don't have the key player, meaning Stop and Shop, the owner of the property, involved. And as long as you don't have the key player involved, you're never going to make any progress. So what's changed here is Stop and Shop will not renew Kmart's lease. And they basically said, this is it, it's over in 3 years. So the owner of the parcel is going to do something with it. Stop and Shop does operate a store in Acton. Winstanley owns and operates the Discovery Way office center, so it's not out-of-town people blowing in and they don't care what they do and how it turns out. They're organizations that are established in the community. So I think this is really the first good chance we have to do something about that piece of property. So I was pretty encouraged. The other piece is that there is road changes, infrastructure changes that have been, even though the Kelly's Corner per se did not get approved, the town meeting did approve applying for the infrastructure changes, and that is on the state's transportation infrastructure plan, or whatever they call it, TIP, for about the same period, 2021, 2022. So it is all beginning to look like it's finally coming together. Jeff has a question.
John, I would encourage you to keep a running tab if you're a member of that committee. Here's how much we get from taxes for that Kmart kind of thing, and what is being proposed, what would that mixed use generate in taxes, minus, worst case, how many students would be in the schools based on those apartments, and, just kind of be our dollars and cents person. There's plenty of other aesthetics and other things that, will be represented on the committee, but it would be kind of good to have that running balance of the tax impacts.
Yeah, I suppose as the project, develops and what he flushes out, but from speaking with a member of his team after the meeting, when I asked her what did you anticipate to be the demographic of these residential units, they would all be rental, and they were talking about seniors moving in there, so there'd be no children, young professionals without children, at $2,600, $2,800 a month, you might be, I think that's probably what you're looking at.
Well, I think the last time Kelly's Corner went to town meeting, they did all those numbers. The problem was because they were making so many assumptions on top of assumptions about things that they had no idea how it would pan out. Nobody believed the numbers, or at least nobody on this committee believed the numbers.
The idea is, I think if we go again, for the zoning change, it would include a specific vision that the developer has for the property, so you could actually see something. It's not piles of assumptions.
I have a couple of things I'd like
Sure.
to say. You're taking one of the last purely zoned for commercial properties in town and turning it into more than 50% residential, at least from the look of this document. It is directly across the street from the school school campus, school complex. If you have 1 and 2 bedroom units, you are going to have a significant number of school-aged children in there, unless you put in a 55 over restriction on this, which I don't believe anyone's talking about. And even if he does put 10% of the units down as affordable housing, it does nothing to help us get out of our 40B, get closer to our 40B goal. I absolutely do not want to see us go down this route.
Okay.
And also, I heard your warning about this could be opened up to a 40B elsewhere. This could be opened up to a 40B if we do nothing. I know that there are other projects in town that would get us to our 10% 40B, and we would no longer be under the responsibility of this. So I do not, I am very nervous about this going forward. I do not like the idea of taking the last large commercial, and yes, I absolutely want that property reworked, but I do not see how this could possibly become tax efficient for us. 100 units directly across from the school district, 4 out of 6 of the schools in town. I absolutely do not like this.
Okay, all right, I'll cut this off because we're not debating this. This is a committee report. You're duly noted, Jason. You can remember those same arguments from 2 years ago.
Funny how they haven't changed.
Janet, would you like to add something?
Did you say that he was proposing a 10% affordable
That's what you just
A
said.
Yeah.
voluntary
Okay.
10%.
10%, yeah.
Because I just wanted to add for Jason's information that with a 40B, if you have an apartment complex, the developer is obligated to provide, I think, 20%. of
25.
And then it's 25% for owner occupied. It's rentals, I thought it was 20%, but the whole complex counts. All of the units, including the market rate units, count toward the 10%, which is why this project that's been discussed, that's on the border with Maynard, be a 40B, and, well, we have to divvy up the units based on where they're located, whether they're the ones in Acton, all of the units, the rental units in Acton would count toward Acton's 10%. That's for rental. That's why the Concord Muse was really good for Concord. It put them right over the 10% immediately, because all of the units were rentals.
And I'm all for
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
getting, I'm all for us meeting.
There has been conversation in town. I mean, the affordable housing people have been approaching sort of keeping it small, because that was what residents seemed to want, is something that
Yep.
was unobtrusive. There's more conversation in recent years about just slap a big project up somewhere on the border, which is typically where these projects seem to go up, where nobody cares, and just get over the 10%, so that then we can say no to some projects. But I don't know how much appetite there is for really huge projects, unless they're on the outskirts of town, so.
I hear you and I understand and I agree, but I'm very uncomfortable with turning this property into such a heavily residential spot.
Just one last word, not as an argument, I meant a point. Right now, developers are shying away from, retail, commercial, because there's just too much of it and they can't make a go of it, and, residential is the thing what they're doing.
So go take a look at Littleton, that is 100% commercial, and they're making money hand over fist. So I'm not sure I believe for a minute that the statement of the person trying to build the place should be taken completely at face value.
I didn't take that from him. I've heard it from other, from other people. And you could look around town, and I think there's what would the percentages be of unrented commercial space, both retail and office?
I forgot what that number is, but I don't know.
Okay.
So
Moving
we'll
on.
discuss this more.
Moving on.
Not in,
Mr. School Committee report?
Yes. Let me look through my notes so that I actually put a filter on them. I think everyone was copied on the certified E&D at just a skosh over $4 million. They are planning on putting the entire feasibility study, taking the entire feasibility study out of E&D. So that was there was a vote originally to take it out of E&D, and then they took another vote with the actual number, which was 1.3 million. The MSBA will allow us to amend our enrollment numbers to show the October 1st numbers. There were 52 more kindergartners than the original projection, and 70 higher than the projection that the MSBA was using. So that is why it's a very good thing we're getting to use the October 1st numbers for the MSBA calculation. Let's see, what else is germane to the Finance Committee? Well, not financial, but yes, they are definitely planning on having a later start time for the junior high and high school. They're still trying to decide exactly what that time would be, but they have come to the agreement that they're going to have a later start time. They just don't know whether it's going to be 8 or 8:30. And they will be having a second workshop which will be a mediator-led workshop for the school committee to come together more as a community.
Okay. Any other committee reports? Yes, Mike.
Real quick, Minuteman, they started pouring concrete last Friday, so that's a was Red Letter Day. On other topics, the EDC, Insulate groundbreaking will be Thursday morning. Janet will be there. That's a big thing. She's baking cookies or something.
You gonna bring a shovel, or? They broke a lot of ground already, from what I can tell.
Oh, this is unofficial.
All right, in that case, unless there's more business to come before the committee, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second. All in favor? Aye.